Hi, gang. Donna here. Today I will be speaking with Ben Winter. Ben is an author of What to Expect When Having Expectations. He's a speaker, actor, improvist, entrepreneur, traveler, father, and much more. He loves to explore physical places around the world, but also loves to explore the mind. So today, his Better To moment is going to be a rather personal one as we discuss his divorce. So, Ben, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So, let's start off with the good. How long were you married before this divorce took place?
Yeah, so we were married for 6 years. I think together for eight. When I do the quick math, so just easier that way. So yeah, it was a good 6 years, and until it wasn't.
Why wasn't it?
So a lot of it, what it came down to is uh, we both just sort of grew apart from each other, and we'd both done a lot of personal growth work. So it wasn't like we didn't know what was going on, that we didn't recognize it for what it was, and that we both had our parts to play. I think the realization really became that neither one of us wanted to do the effort. we just we were just like, well, I know what I need and you're not giving it to me, and I know what you need and I'm not giving it to you. But it became this sort of thing of indifference, and that's where you kind of know that it was done. And so it was a mutual split, which I think is probably the best way to go when it comes to that, because I've seen a lot of contentious divorces and people that are just super angry with each other and do the most horrible things to each other. And I'm so grateful I didn't have to go through that.
Yeah, a lot. There's my parents had a contentious divorce, so yeah, I understand that. Um, were you guys? Did you guys get married young, or
No, no. So I let's see, I wasn't 30 yet. I was almost 30. So it definitely was not early on in the process. So um, it's I think it was just more like everything was good at the beginning. Um, we both were wanting more out of life, and we were both doing a lot of work to get there and a lot of personal growth work. We did have a kid, um, and I think a lot of people, they don't understand that when you have a kid, your entire dynamic changes as a
Mhm.
romantic couple. And I think part of the problem might have been that our son wasn't unplanned, but the timing was unplanned. if that
Understand?
makes sense. Like it
Yeah,
was like, oh, we're pregnant. Okay, well, we knew we were going to have a kid or two or whatever. But
just not yet.
this quick, yeah. I mean, it was pretty quick. We were married less than a year before we were pregnant, so it was like, hmm, okay. Um, that really just I took a lot of steam out of the relationship and what it was, and unfortunately, that um, I don't think we ever really recovered from that. It
I think
became sort of habit of not being romantic with each other anymore.
I think that happens in a lot of relationships. I mean, when we get involved with somebody, usually there's that initial impact of, well, I'll just be blunt, let's rip our clothes off and go to town. And not taking it. And I'm not saying that's the case with everybody. I mean, me personally, I've had two marriages. One as a divorce and one as a widow. And they're different dynamics in both of them starting because I was at different ages.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people just they feel that connection, they feel the physical attraction, they don't take the time to get to know people, and they just dive headlong into the relationship because they base it on the physical. I'm not saying you did that, but I just know from friends of mine that they're like, oh, I've met this wonderful guy and he's so great and da 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 da. And it's like, do you know him? And I mean, I've done my own things where I've jumped in and I didn't know somebody, and you know, that's when you're young. So I guess my point is, was the relationship based more on the physical attraction? Was this person a really close friend first, or were you, riding the wave of euphoria of love?
Yeah, so I think it's a little even weirder than that. So for most of my younger life, I really had zero self confidence. I had no self esteem. Like I was that introverted guy who sat on the sidelines and just sort of watched life happen. And for whatever reason, I had made up in my mind that if I could date somebody and they were with me for over a year, that they must be the one.
Okay.
You know, it wasn't like a year went by and I said, you know, do I really like this person? Do I want to spend my life with them? Do, you know, all the reasonable questions somebody would ask about whether to, you know, get married. I just had this number in mind where we're together for a year. She must be the one. So I'm going to ask her. Right. So it wasn't to really be, you know, yeah, there was physical there, but we spent a lot of time together before we ever got physical. So I would say there was some level of friendship there as well. Because, you know, I feel like when we finally got to the physical aspect of it, it wasn't everything that I imagined it would be. Um, like that first kiss wasn't as magical as some first kisses are. And so, but we had spent so much time together getting to that point that I kind of felt like I was invested in the relationship. So again, I feel like when I entered the marriage, it wasn't so much for the right reasons. Um, it wasn't the wrong reasons, but it wasn't the best reasons either. Like it was just a very interesting situation. And you know, that's where, you know, I don't know. I learned some lessons. A lot of lessons. I'm very grateful for having the marriage that I had because my life is so much different and so much better as a result of it. So, you know, some people are like, I regret having ever married that person or whatever. I don't have those regrets. I mean, if nothing else, I have my son as a result of that marriage. If nothing else, you know, I started becoming an entrepreneur. If nothing else, I became an author. You know, I learned improv as a result of that marriage. Like there was so much that I've gained as a result of the marriage that to discount it would be just stupid.
I think a lot of people, that's what we lose. We lose the fact that we don't see what we've gained. There's a lot of people that just, Kenny, sorry. I think that we just lose out, that we don't necessarily look at, well, look how my life is enriched. I would have never been a mom had I never married my first husband because he had two kids. So I would have never gotten the opportunity to explore that. And that was a gift. It taught me a lot about myself. Yes, kids definitely change everything, whether they're bio kids or not. They change everything. I mean, um, when I was a mom, Beavis and Butthead started coming out, and we lived in a small town, so I didn't even have it. So my sister-in-law videotapes it, and she sends me the videotape, and I'm like mortified, like, oh my gosh, my kids could never watch this. Fast forward to me being single a few years later, and it's like, oh, this is freaking funny. This is hilarious. So your whole perception between parent and mother, parent and single changes. Um, when you're talking about wrong reasons to get married, my husband, my second husband, when he married his first wife, he always would tell me, because he was husband number two for her, he would always tell me that when they got married, and they had a big wedding and everything, I said, so why'd you marry her? It was something to do. I would always look at him like, that's why you got married. Yeah, it was something to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And he was getting into his 30s at that point, so I mean, I can understand, but still it's just one of those things you actually blatantly say it was something to do. You weren't madly in love. Nope, just something to do.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, you know, I was just thinking about it while I was talking about it. And, you know, she might have said yes just because I think women fantasize about somebody actually asking them to marry them. And so I don't know that some of them think straight either at that moment.
I will. I've had this conversation. Disney gets a lot of guff for teaching girls about Disney princesses,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for saying Disney. But the fact of the matter is, romance books, and yes, I do write romance. At least one of them. One of my books is a standard romance. We look at that, and there's a whole discussion with one of my friends about it, because it's like we set these, not only do we set relationship goals in these books that women just fall for, that you guys have such standards you can never live up to, because it's not only just the hearts and flowers and romance, it's the actual physical acts, the sexual acts. And I mean, now it's gotten to the point where, everything has to be described, including size. And if it's not, just, in fact, I did a chat about my book because I didn't go into detail about how he's built. And I actually had a couple of readers say, we need more description in the sex scenes. And I got in the comment that I'm walking a fine line between writing erotica and porn, and they need more.
Hmm.
So how does a real guy, compete with that?
Well, and
You,
then you throw in movies where, at the beginning of the movie, these two characters meet, and then by the end of the movie, which might have been several days or
yeah.
weeks passing, and now they're madly in love and they want to get married. And I'm like, if you look at the timeline of some of those movies, it is absolutely ridiculous how quickly people end up together.
Well, then I can tell you my stupidity of when I was 22 and I met my first husband, and we went out on one date and he moved in with me.
Huh?
Now, looking back, was it really love? Doubtful. Um, and he proposed to me on the third day we were together.
Wow.
Yeah, and I proceeded to tell him, well, I don't know you well enough. Okay, idiot. Excuse me, I will say that about myself because at that time, how stupid are you? You're telling him you can't marry him, but you let him move in with you.
The rational mind of humans.
The rational mind of a 22-year-old girl who has expectations about I don't want to be alone, and you don't think you for a guy, you're not consistently told all the time, well, you need to get married, you need to have a kid. That comes later for you guys. Your guys are allowed to explore and do whatever in most cases. And girls, you have not only your mother but your grandmother and possibly your aunts telling you, so when are you getting married? They
Yeah.
don't care
And then
about
it's,
what's
yeah, and then it doesn't matter if you get married, it's like the next day or even that same day when you're going to start having babies, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I told my mom at 17, I'm not going to have kids. I'm going to either adopt or I'll marry somebody with kids. Self fulfilling prophecy. I mean, I didn't seriously mean it, but that's how it's played out.
There you go.
So I know. So when you got to the point of divorce, was this something that you just woke up one day and said, okay, this isn't working anymore?
No, it took a while. We tried several different things to kind of get the relationship back on track, try to work. Um, we even did the open marriage thing for a while, which anybody who's been in that world will tell you, like, that will not fix your marriage. Like, you have to have a strong marriage to do an open relationship. Like, if you try and do an open relationship without fixing your marriage, you're just adding gasoline to the fire. And that's what ultimately happened. Was it became super super clear that we were just not supposed to be together anymore. um, and that's really all that happened. But it took a long time to get there because I mean, we talked about it on 3 separate occasions over 18 months before we even opened up the marriage. And the third time when she brought it up, I was like, well, that's the third time you've brought it up. Like, are we going to do this or just keep talking about it? Right. And so
And
that was kind of, we saw it coming. It was not right around the corner. It was down the street. You could see it
yeah,
coming.
the open marriage thing, I mean, that I knew another couple that had an open marriage and ultimately it did not work out. But the open marriage thing, I mean, you have to be secure in the relationship, like you were saying. It has to be strong because otherwise, isn't jealousy going to be involved in that?
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of books out there about it, and we were told to read one, and I mean, everything in that book was telling us not to do it. I mean, it was just like red flag after red flag, and we wanted to do it anyway. And that's I think that was kind of our first admission that our marriage was done, is that we don't care about all these red flags that say don't do it. I think what it comes down to is when you kind of asked, were you more friends or were you more physical, at the beginning. I kind of feel like the stronger marriages that are based on a friendship and the ideal values, those are the ones that can survive an open marriage because it's not about the physical at that point. It's like, you're going to go do some physical stuff. I'm going to go do some physical stuff. But ultimately, our minds are like one. We're a great couple. We're very compatible for everything. And we just want to explore this physical aspect of life. And there are some couples out there that absolutely do great at open relationships, and more power to them. But it does take a completely different mindset.
Well, and you brought the point about red flags. How many times in real life, not even just marriage, but there's the screaming red flag of don't do this. I, I mean, when I the first date I went on with my first husband, my back started acting up, and it's like I kept backing up. It was just backing out. I'm like, I should back out. I called him like, I really don't, I'm not feeling good. I don't. Intuition was 100% saying run, and I'm like, no, no, no. I'm just gonna. He talked me into it. It's like, okay, but I mean, we look at red flags in our life, and we just go, yeah, that's not us. It doesn't pertain to us. We're good. We'll make it through. But yet we always get bit in the ass.
Exactly. So, it's I think sometimes taking the cues, the red flags is what they are, is scarier sometimes. It's like, well, I don't want to be hurt. I don't want to hurt the other person. But this there's so many flags saying that we shouldn't be doing this or whatever.
Hmm. I applaud you for it being amicable, because I mean it is a tough thing, and if you can walk away with it being with still being friends, or at least being able to have open communication without being angry, that it's not only good for your child, it's also good for your soul, because you don't have all that anger wrapped up at going, I hate this person, and every time I have to see this person, I seethe.
Yeah. I'm absolutely grateful for that, especially since we are co-parents. Like, we have a child, and that will never change. It's I will not stop being his dad, and she will not stop being his mom. So, whether we want to or not, we are in each other's lives forever.
Yeah.
Hopefully forever. Hopefully he outlives us. That's
Yeah.
no parent wants to not.
No.
Um, but after school's done, maybe we'll talk a little bit, when he's getting married or, has something happening in his life. Who knows?
I went to my stepdaughter's wedding with her mom and my ex-husband, and with my husband. So that was just a fun time.
Yeah, I don't know where things will end up, but I am grateful that we have the amicable relationship that we do.
It's important. And your son, ultimately, it'll be good for him.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about your book. So what to expect when having expectations. That's one thing we all have in life, is expectations. So talk to me about it.
Yeah, so the book really kind of explores where our expectations come from, why we have them, and at the end of it, well, throughout it, it's really talking about those moments in time where we get upset because an expectation is going unmet. So whether we're talking about a marriage not working out, I mean, talk about an expectation. You don't get into a marriage expecting it to fail, right? You expect it to work. So when it doesn't, you get upset about it. It really kind of explores all the aspects of an expectation, and then ultimately, um, how to work through those moments in time when you're upset because an expectation isn't going the way you expected it. And when we think about relationships, there's so many unspoken expectations about what we want from our partner, or in the situation when we're living together. Somebody might expect the bathroom to be cleaned once a week, some might expect it every 2 weeks, one might expect uh, things not to be left out on the counter, like every single time you use something it's got to be put away, and other people are like, no, it's totally fine to leave stuff out for a day or two. There's lots of little things that kind of add up, and then there's also the big things. You talk about sex, people have expectations about what they want to be able to do in the bedroom, or have done to them or not done to them, whatever it may be. And sometimes we're too afraid to talk to our partners about it, because what if they don't like it? What if there's a lot of fear behind sharing some expectations, because if you share that expectation and they're completely 100% against it, now you have this weird thing you have to do, which is called a
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And nobody likes to have conversations these days. I mean, communication just sucks. So
Right.
but
And I mean, communication, it's always been tough, but now it's even, what were you saying? Oh yeah, I was looking at my phone. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Can you tell, you want to talk
yeah.
about it again? Yeah, no. I'm trying to be real with you, but no. I mean, for me, because I was married for 17, with him for 17 years. It's like, okay, so now I get to decide how I want to proceed with the next part of my life. And it's just like those expectations of going on a dating site. Oh, no, no. Because I've watched a friend in the mid 90s go on a dating site, and this guy told her he was a male model.
Oh,
And it couldn't be further from the truth.
maybe he was 20 years ago. Who knows?
No, no, he did say his age correctly, but he was a
Oh,
grocery store clerk in England
oh, well,
who liked
that's
to drink. So it was kind of
definitely not a
like,
male model.
no. And it was just, and the thing is, even though he lied to her, she still pursued the relationship.
Huh,
They
interesting.
got engaged in Paris, and the marriage didn't last, but it was just one of those things where it's like, really? So I just, because you're setting up the, when talk about expectations, whether it's a dating site or even social media, you're setting those expectations. We let so many people into our world to see this little cosmic, dare I say, sphere, or because it's a little ball that we've created of who we are and who we present to the world. But that's not really who we are. It's not all the layers, and we only look at the artifice that's in front of us. We don't look at the real person.
Yeah.
And, you know, that goes back to expectations. When you're creating that, you're expecting people to see you a certain way, good, bad, and indifferent. Have you found that? I mean, so you were divorced. How was your experience after being divorced going back out into the dating world?
I expect different things for myself more than anything else. I expect myself to, I'm going to say, ask those tough questions like, do you actually love this person? Like, do you want to spend time with them? Like, is this relationship working out? Is it not working out? Are these the things that I want in a relationship, or am I settling again? Like, I think I probably have more expectations on myself, which can be good, but can also be very paralyzing because if you put too much on yourself, and let's just say you have 10 things and the person meets 9 of them, are you really going to find that person that has 10? Well, maybe, maybe not. Um, but if the expectation is I got to find the 10 out of 10, all these things, and I'm not willing to give up one of them, it might just take longer. And
Or it may not
it's
happen.
yeah, or it may just not happen. Who knows? But that's kind of one of those interesting things where I don't want to end up in the same situation. I don't want to end up having to get a divorce again. So I think part of me doesn't even want to get married again because it's like, well, if I can commit to somebody but never get married, then that's okay. Because then, whatever. But I also don't know what the future holds. Maybe I find that person and marriage just makes perfect sense. I
Well, well, the thing is, you get to a certain point, and you're putting that fear in there. I
Yeah.
mean, when I met my second husband, he's like, we were friends first, and then eventually we moved into dating, and he's like, let's get married, and I'm like, bought the T-shirt, bought the ticket, not doing that again. And he's like, oh, come on, it'll be different this time, because when I got married the first time, our relationship completely changed. Like you were saying about the child, for me, the relationship changed because I was like, oh, I'm going to dictate where you're going to go, and I'm going
Mm.
to tell you what to do. And I don't know if you know that about me because you haven't, we just met, but I'm not one to take direction like that very, very easily. So, um, by the time my second husband, I was just like, I don't want to do that. But honestly, it was the best thing I could have done. I mean, we had a great marriage. So I'm glad I did it. So sometimes you have to get past that fear because even though it's an expectation, there's that hidden fear behind it.
Yeah.
That what if I'm not successful? What if this fails? Well, just like your first marriage, you lived, you got something from it, you benefited, you grew. So
Mhm.
even if you're willing to take that risk, even if you don't, you can still find a happy medium there. If you live with them, if you marry them, you can still get something from it.
Absolutely. And I'm fortunate enough to have the personal growth background that I do, because personal growth at the end of the day is just awareness training. And so I have enough awareness to realize, like, okay, I have these fears, I have these thoughts. What I do with them is what I do with them. If I choose to just not be married and maybe live with somebody, then that's what I choose to do. And I'm going to have that conversation with them and see what, because maybe it's a deal breaker for them. Maybe they're like, no, someday I definitely want to get married, and not getting married is not an option. So then we have
Well,
to have that conversation.
but then you have the person that will not be honest with you. The person
True.
that will sit there and say, "Oh yeah, I don't need to get married," but yet they're sitting there telling their friends, I really wish he would give me that ring.
Right.
I'm not one of those people, but I've known those people, and I'm just like, well, did you tell him you wanted to get? No, no.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, there are people that won't tell you the truth. And you know that's another expectation people have of each other, is like, I hope the person that I'm with will tell me what they're thinking, tell me the truth. And yet they don't. And so you know you can't necessarily get upset with that, because did they get their chance to buy into that expectation? Did you have that conversation to say, hey, I expect you to tell me what you're feeling and thinking? And if you don't, then why not? What's the fear?
do you think that the way we're raised creates our expectations?
100%. The way we're raised, the way we're parented, the way we're not parented, the way we see society through watching Disney movies, whatever, we have expectations of how the world is supposed to work. And whether we saw it by example from our parents, whether we decided to emulate that or do something different, really comes down to how we're raised. If you're raised where you're in a household where the parents are very loving and caring of one another, and they've been married for decades and decades and decades, and they're never going to get divorced, like, you just don't see that ever happening, then you kind of grow up expecting that when you get into a marriage, that's going to be the end all be all forever. At the same time, some people don't want to emulate that because they don't like what they see. um, you can get tons of stories where somebody grew up in poverty and they're like, I don't want to live my life in poverty, and so they create the most amazing things, and they become millionaires, and they're out of poverty because they wanted something different. But they had an expectation of themselves, whether it was subconscious or conscious,
Yeah.
that how I was raised is either I'm going to emulate that, or I'm going to do something completely different because it didn't work for me. And that'll happen between siblings in the same household,
Oh yeah.
because they see life differently.
I can look at my husband's family. His parents were married 60 years. His oldest sister had been divorced. His next brother was married and stayed married. And I mean, and his other two siblings, they were married and everything, and happy marriage. I think for my husband, and we've talked about this, he's like, had I met you earlier, it would have been better. We would have had kids. We would have emulated his family. But because he was in his 30s and single, something to do, which is totally against the grain of that that perfect family, that happy family with 5 kids. And even in their darkest times, his parents still stayed together. His mom had dementia, and she was in a nursing home all the time, and Rich was there every day
Yeah.
because he loved her that much, and that was commitment. So I mean, I think we definitely learn from our parents. We do. And then we also learn from our peers, because how who teaches us how to date? It's not our parents. It's certainly not our parents. We learn it from school. We learn it from the movies we watch. We learn it from the videos we've seen, and it's not always healthy because we're emulating something that we shouldn't. I remember when my kids were little, Full House was on, the original Full House, and they were about 7 and 9, and the youngest one started acting like Michelle. So she was kind of being really sassy. Well, you don't, it's cute on TV, but you don't want your child to necessarily be doing this. So it's just like, all right, we're not watching this anymore. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, if you're going to pick up those habits, we're not going to watch this. But nope, we're done. Not watching it. And I think a lot of parents don't do that nowadays. They're just kind of like, okay, whatever. My mom was very staunch about what I watched. However, that being said, I did watch Three's Company, where my husband, who was older than me, his parents refused to allow them to watch Three's Company.
Yeah,
And it's like,
it's just so different. And
yeah,
every household's different, plain and
yeah,
simple. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, my mom took me to see Endless Love, and she stuck her hand over my eyes and shoved me down in the seat, and I was a freshman in high school. It's like, all right, okay, why'd you take me to see it anyway? When Saturday Night Fever came out, she took me to see it, and I'm like, I want to go upstairs and watch Star Wars. I don't want to watch this. So as soon as they were getting busy in the back of the car, she's like, okay, you can go. She hid my eyes until the scene was over, and she's like, going upstairs. I'm like, all right, fine. But that's what's funny. It's like, you're so conservative, mom, but then you're taking me to these R-rated movies. What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's got an R rating for a reason.
Yeah, it's not going to be all fluffy and happy.
No.
Which I know this is getting off topic about expectations, but
Well, no,
Hollywood,
it's not. It's, you know, that's just it, is the world around us provides us our expectations. If we have no experience, then that becomes our expectation of how things are supposed to be. That becomes our reality.
yeah.
And
Well,
that's just what it is.
uh, back to writing. Everybody assumes what's funny in romance books is women hate cheaters. It's okay if the woman cheats, but if a man cheats, God forbid, it's just bad. And so I tend to write in the rock star world, and most rock star romances, most of them, not all of them. There are some of us that are brave enough to get dinged in reviews because we have a cheater. Um, Women get very upset if a rock star is cheating. Now you're talking about a rock star who's got how many women throwing themselves at him? Half the time they're either drinking or doing drugs. Not always, but sometimes they are. And you expect them to be like John Bon Jovi and be Mr. Faithful all the time. Now I'm not saying that the unicorn does not exist in the real world, but in most cases, if a guy has women that are hot throwing themselves at him,
At some
I
point, they're going to give.
exactly, it's libido over brain, it happens. But amazingly enough, expectations are being set by these books. And I had the friend that we were discussing this with, she told her uh, niece, she's like, do not let your kids read this until they're 17, 18 years old, because they'll have expectations of what things should be like, including sex. So don't.
Yeah.
And, the same can be said for, I was in a chat with some people, and they were talking about how porn now has actually started where 8-year-old boys are watching porn. 8 years old. And they're like, it's setting expectations up for these kids this is their first appearance of a naked woman. And this is the first example of sex to them. So their experience now is going to be tainted because they think that they should see this. And anybody who's picked up a girly magazine knows that that's not real. It's airbrushed. Every magazine we look at is airbrushed. A nudie magazine is not going to be any different.
Oh, no, not at all.
Or Photoshop. I'm aging myself. But you know what I'm getting at. So we're setting up those expectations for kids on their first experience now because they have access. Because they're not going to click that, are you 18 or older? They're not going to say yes. Of course not. Yeah, right.
Of course I am. My friend told me to just say yes. It's
exactly.
fine.
And even if you are a parent and you're trying to meticulously say, no, you can't play this video game because it's too violent. Oh, okay. Hey, guess what I did over at Timmy's house?
Yeah, right.
Oh, look what Timmy had on his phone. Because Timmy knows how to do break the security lock, and his parents don't know how to even put one on. There's so many little things that, how do you protect your kids?
And that's the other thing is, as parents these days, we weren't raised with the same technology, so we have no experience of how to parent with it because our parents didn't have to.
No.
So we're making it up as we go. And, fortunately we can, query the internet and say, how are other parents dealing with this situation? So we can still use technology to help parent technology, but at the same time, it's all new to all of us, plain and simple.
I mean, the bullying aspect of it, before, the biggest thing you had to worry about was being bullied at school. Nobody was, or maybe at your house, but around your house. But most of the time, it was only in-person bullying. Now, I've gone on TikTok and seen people get shamed and talk about killing themselves. And it's like, how do we how do you stop that? I mean, once again, it's an expectation of we should be able to function as a society without being bullied, but yet we still find that need to, not me personally, but there are people that still find that power to knock down the smaller person. So how do we get past that to create a more safer environment for kids and even adults?
I think it's ultimately going to come down to just getting the message out there that there are just assholes in the world, and you have to learn to grow some thick skin. I mean, it's not the best answer,
No.
but that's ultimately what it is like I could post something out there and have somebody who I think is a friend say something stupid and disagree with me. Is that the end of my world? Like, am I now, you know, am I done? And
Yeah.
it's just like I have a message, I have something to say, and if people like it, great. If they don't, whatever. I can't imagine being a like actors. They post something online and you've got haters all day long, and you've got people and fans all day long. I think most of them, the way that they handle it is they just don't look at the comments. And I think if we can teach our kids to just, are you happy with what you created?
Right.
Then don't look at the comments.
And that's the thing. Everybody's got an opinion, and there's
Oh
a
yeah.
statement. There's a statement that goes with that. But you know, it's hard not to look. It's hard not to, because we have become such an instant gratification society that we
Mhm.
want that gratification. So just saying, "Oh, don't look," it's you're driving along the freeway. Don't look at the car accident to slow down, to stop, to create a traffic jam.
Yeah.
But you do.
It is easy. It's so much easier to say than it is to
Mhm.
do. And I'm guilty. And these are the things that actually keep me up at night as a parent, because I don't know the answer. I know what I can say, I know what I can do, I know what I do. I'll sit there and I'll just scroll through Facebook for a while and, randomly, because I'm just bored or whatever.
Mhm.
And I'll see myself getting frustrated and upset because I'm just seeing this crap. But I have enough wherewithal to say, time to put this away, because you're starting to get upset by stupidity that's out there. So let's go do something that's not focusing on the stupid in the world and do something creative, or, you know, like go on a walk. I don't know, something like that. Um, so creating that wherewithal for our children to say, hey, it's time to take a step back and do something else so you don't keep feeling this, might be the only solution. Just say, hey, if you're starting to feel sad and upset, it's time to put the phone away and go on a walk. It's time to put the phone away and draw something. It's time to put the phone away and read something. What? Maybe whatever it is. I think
I,
it's just teaching our kids how to do something different when it comes to those moments in time where they get depressed and upset.
Well, and I think that's important because if if there's ever a reason for there not to be an internet, you know, if for some reason the power's out, for some reason, whatever happens and everything goes down because Facebook has gone down and everybody's lost their mind because Facebook's gone down. It's good to teach your kid and even us as adults to go back to what we did beforehand, before we had the internet, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because if we didn't have technology, what will we be doing? You didn't have the expectation of, well, let me just call, you knew your friend's phone number. I can't tell you a phone number to save my life now except my own. But before, man, I was like a Rolodex. You had everybody's number, you could call, and now that's not the case. You have
Yeah.
to have that phone. So I think that we have to step back sometimes and start retraining ourselves because it not only teaches us to use what we have, it also makes us stronger as a person, I think. When I couldn't spell something, my mom would be like, look it up in the dictionary. And I was like, if I can't spell it, how am I going to look it up in the dictionary?
I had the same thought too when I
But
was a
here's the
kid.
thing. She looked at me, she says, sound it out. And
Yeah.
sure enough, you sound it out and you're able to look it up. And that was, it was something I had to learn. So I think it's a fact that if we start working toward teaching our kids, because what happens if they They decide to take a trip to, I want to go camping. Let's go up to the mountains. Okay, guess what? You don't have cell service now.
Exactly. Got to do
How's your
something else.
how's your vacation going to be, or are you going to be so frustrated because now you don't have cell service?
Right. And I think it might be more important to take kids on camping trips more often to disconnect from the world, because that might be our only saving grace as time goes on, is finding ways to disconnect for our own sanity.
I interviewed a woman a while back. She has, I think, 3 kids. She's in England, and she has time where they're allowed a certain amount of screen time a week. And at that point, nope. And in fact, she got in trouble because the teacher called up and she's like, "Well, she has to do her homework on the computer." And she says she has only X number of screen time. She's like, "That's different. She's allowed to use it for her homework, not for play." So I mean, I think we have to set parameters. Even as adults, we have to set it.
Yeah. And it definitely gets tougher to put that on ourselves, because we're like, well, I give myself a break. I mean, it's the same thing with a diet. Like,
Hmm.
oh, well, just this time I'm going to have that extra cookie, or whatever it is. Like, we as adults make so many more excuses for ourselves than we do for our kids. And um, it's definitely easier to impose things on our children sometimes than it is on ourselves.
Well,
But yeah, I agree. We all need to do it for sure.
you can impose it on your kid. That doesn't mean they're going to actually follow through.
It's very true. But you're paying the bill on the Wi-Fi router, so you can change the password whenever you want.
This is true. This is very true. So what made you decide to write this book?
So a lot of what I do is team building and training using the tools and techniques of improv. So I'm out there teaching improv, and one of the things that I kept coming across was this general saying of, the only reason anybody gets upset is because an expectation hasn't been met. And it kind of played into one of the rules of improv. And then I eventually was like, well, it's a cool saying and all, doesn't solve anybody's problem. So let me kind of dive into it. And so I sat down with it and I said, okay, the problem is you're upset, and it's all around expectations. So what do I do with that? And I created this flow chart that kind of walks people through, like, hey, you're upset. Did you know you had the expectation? Yes or no, et cetera, et cetera, going through the workflow. And every time that I came to a spot where it was like a no, there's just a lot of depth there. For example, have you shared your expectation? A lot of people haven't shared their expectation because there's so much fear behind sharing it. Because what if I share my expectation and they don't agree? What if I share my expectation and they leave? What if they don't, like me because I shared an expectation? Um, another word you can throw in there is boundaries. What if I
Hmm.
set a boundary that somebody doesn't like? That's an expectation. A boundary is an expectation. And so it was very just logical for me to kind of take the workflow and turn it into a book, and really kind of dive deeper into all the areas of where they come from, why we have them, the fears behind, why we don't share things, why we didn't even know we had the expectation until it's staring us in the face, that sort of thing. So it's just this natural progression of, from improv, oddly enough, that I came to this need to write this book.
You mentioned something about fear. Um, and when we think about expectations and the fear, depending on how you were parented, we're going back to that one again. Your parents would, if you express something, 9 times out of 10, your parents would look at you and say, "No, I don't want to hear it." So how can you learn to express yourself when you don't have that communication as a child? And I mean, I know that as a child we're supposed to, spare the rod, spoil the child, or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, if we're not having communication, because I am the parent, and I'm not saying I didn't make mistakes as a step parent, but I think, looking back as an older person, if my mother would have been more willing to listen to what I had to say instead of going, "You're the child, go sit down."
Right.
I
It's
think. Go ahead.
it's a weird conundrum, because I sit here and watch myself as a parent, and I say, you know, our job as parents is to teach our kids how to be adults. And we as adults expect everyone around us to understand what's going on. So when our kid is happy, they don't know that that's what's happening because they don't know what emotions are. They don't have the word to go with what's happening for them. So if they're happy, we need to identify, hey, you're happy. When they're going through stuff, rather than fight them and say, stop being upset, stop yelling, stop, don't do these things, it becomes more of a need to say, do you know why you're going through what you're going through right now? Do you understand why you're upset? You seem to be upset, or you're frustrated. Because once they can identify this emotion is frustration, this emotion is fear, this emotion is upset, then they can start to communicate a little more effectively. But to your point, I'm the parent, you're the child, shut up. It's
Well,
like you're not allowed to be cranky as a kid. Kids are allowed to be cranky. They have just as much reason to be cranky as adults have to be cranky. They just don't understand what's happening. And we as parents, unfortunately, don't take the time to teach them, hey, you're cranky. Maybe this is why you're cranky. I don't know, but let's work through it. And if we teach our kids how to work through emotions to get to where they ultimately want to be, that's much healthier for them. It's much healthier for the relationship. To the question that you had, how do we do it as adults when we've been trained our entire life to just bottle it up and not share? The only thing is practice. You got to practice, and it's scary as hell the first time you do it. Um, to set boundaries with somebody, and or set an expectation or communicate with somebody something that you're thinking and feeling, there is that innate fear because you're going to get shut down like you were when you were a kid, and
well,
that they're not going to take you seriously.
and that ties into your self-esteem, going back to something you touched on earlier, your self-esteem. If your self-esteem, if you've been constantly told, no, you're a kid, no, this, you can't do that, no, 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 and or you're not doing something good enough, and then you start learning the whole people pleaser pattern. So then while your self-esteem's tanking, the only way you're going to get validation is you start working to please others. And I remember, I was 19, and my first roommate is like, "Why do you say I'm sorry all the time? What are you
Mm-hmm.
talking about? I don't do that." Because we are so ingrained to that behavior that we don't realize it. And eventually you get to a point you're like, "Okay, I see what I'm doing wrong," and you know that you've learned this. Same thing with setting boundaries. The first time I set a boundary with one of my friends who was a bully, when I first said no about going someplace, she totally blew me off, stormed around. She wanted to go to the show, and I knew it was going to be raining, and I didn't want to walk to the movie. And I'm like, no. She's like, come on. I'm like, no. Went to her room, slammed the door, came back out. You coming? No. I said no. She comes back drenched 2 hours later, comes in, slams the door, doesn't talk to me. And I mean, this is me taking my power back, and she's still not talking to me. About 30 minutes later, I finally said, so how was the movie? Oh, it was fine. But she was nasty as anything to me before she went because I set that boundary. And that's something that we're not taught as kids, because people are putting boundaries on us, and that expectation of who we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be that good kid.
Exactly. So it's just, if you look at it from the standpoint that you learned a a way to be, you were programmed to do a certain thing for 18, 20, 30 years, you can't just immediately expect to be done with it the next day when you decide. It's a practice, and it takes conscious choice on a regular basis to do something different.
Because otherwise it's just like alcoholism. Because one wrong thing and you can fall right back into that behavior. If you put yourself in that same situation with somebody else, you can fall right back into those same patterns.
Exactly. So, just you take the little things and you change those first, and then you get more comfortable with the harder and harder things as time
So,
goes on.
has your book been well received?
Everybody that's read it, with the exception of one review, and I'm going to say that guy didn't actually read the words. He just kind of came up with his own idea of what the book said.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of his words were like, where did you get that from? Um, most of the reviews have been absolutely fantastic. People are absolutely loving it. And the message is there. And, if people want to learn from it, great. If they don't, whatever.
So are you teaching it outside of the book, or are you just,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
an, yeah.
A lot of it's through, especially over the last year with the pandemic, a lot of it's been through interviews like this, and um, just kind of general online speaking engagements.
So your, how did the pandemic change your expectations?
uh, Honestly, I kind of feel like I was able to handle it quite well just because of my improv background. Because improv teaches you to accept what is and then do something with it.
Yeah.
So rather than sit there and fight, like, oh, I can't go out, or oh, I can't see friends in person, it's like, what can I do? Well, I can go to Zoom meetings, I can have Zoom dates, I can have Zoom this, and I can go to a park and talk to somebody 10 feet away. It's like I don't have to just be a victim to the situation. I can still do things. It's just not going to look the way that I wanted it to look. Um, so my improv background definitely helped me not freak out so much over the last year. Yeah, expectations, sitting here building a business that I kind of feel like requires some in-person interaction.
Yeah.
Team
Yeah.
building is kind of,
Mm-hmm.
bring the
Yeah.
team together. And so when you're not able to do that, it's like, okay, well, how do I do team building virtually? How do I do
Yeah.
things virtually? And so it's just adapting to the situation. It's really what it comes down to.
Which, you mentioned victim expectations and victimhood.
Hmm.
Do you see a connection there?
The way that I look at it is the people who get upset and stay there are the ones who are victims. They don't get anything that they want in life. They're always blaming other people for their own problems. Now, the people who get upset and choose to do something different, choose to use that as a moment in time for growth, choose to recognize it for what it is that maybe I didn't know that I had this expectation and I need to do something about it, or I get to learn from it. Those are the people that are living a responsible life where they choose their own actions, where they choose how they want to be and think and feel. And uh, yes, expectations and them going up on having those expectations going unmet can absolutely lead to somebody being a victim in their own life. Um, but you don't have to stay there. You can look at it for what it is and choose something different.
But that's the whole thing from the start of that to the end of it. If you haven't made that choice and you choose to be a victim, there's a tarot card called the Hangman, and you know the guy's hanging there in the breeze. And I always tell people, it's like you have to make a choice. If you choose not to make that choice, a choice will be made for you.
Hmm.
So inaction is not the place where you need to be. And I think a lot of victimhood comes from, well, it's just going to work out. Well, not if you don't make the effort.
Right. And the other piece, I think, a lot of I'd say a lot of people would have this question of, well, how do I make a choice to do something different when I didn't even know I had a choice? Well, I mean, if you're listening to this, you now know that you have a
Hmm.
choice. Whether you understand it, whether you've experienced it, that's irrelevant at the moment. Just being aware that there is a choice to make gives you a huge leap and bounds above and beyond where you were and where other people are that don't understand they have a choice.
And I think that's, for either people, I don't want to say necessarily always people in poverty, but people in poverty or even women. I mean, I'm amazed now that I've met women that are younger than me that still have that mentality of, well, the husband has to take care of everything. The husband's the breadwinner. And I'm not saying that a stay at home mom is a bad thing, because I was a stay at home mom for a bit, but I still knew what was going on with ourselves, the stuff financially and everything else. But there's so many women that they have that expectation that has been placed upon them to get married and have kids, and then they expect, just like the 50s, to not have any role except playing homemaker. And as I've always said, what happens when something happens to him? What are you going to do? You're willing to stay in a marriage that may not be good, it may be toxic, but you don't want to know anything because, well, that's not my role. So back to expectations, we start discussing roles and labels, because we then put people in boxes. We put people in this role. You're the housewife, you're the homemaker. That's what you're supposed to do. There's nothing else for you. You're supposed to take care of him.
Yeah. And until somebody asks them those questions, like, well, what happens when?
And
Um,
you want to know the answer to that I get? The answer I get, well, I don't know.
yeah.
And I put that to this woman when I worked in insurance. She was headed for a car accident, and I simply asked her what she did to avoid the car accident, because there was a car coming at her. And she says, well, I did what I do with my son who's 3 when he gets scared. And I said, what is that? I put my hand over my eyes and counted to 3. That's how she avoided the car accident. I'm just like,
Ouch.
yeah, but how do you, this is somebody that's going to claim that she was a victim. She's like, there was nothing I could do. I bet you if you took the time from putting your hands here and put your hands on the steering wheel, you might have thought of something.
Yeah, you had plenty of time if it took you like for that much time to pass. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had time to react. Wow. Yeah, I think until somebody wants something different, nothing different's going to happen.
Agreed.
And that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's like until somebody recognizes that they have a problem and they want something different, they're not going to recognize it for what it is. It's kind of like somebody who you say like, hey, you're an alcoholic, you need to go to AA. They're going to be like, I don't have a problem,
I
and they're
I
not going to do anything.
I had a gentleman earlier talk about that. And yeah, his sister came down from another state to try to convince him to get help. And he wasn't ready to hear that. And that's the thing with a lot of situations in our life. If we're not willing to hear and listen, that's the other person's expectation of me. That's not what I want. So
Yeah.
therefore it's not going to succeed. You have to, especially in a marriage, since we started this with marriage, especially when it's a marriage, you have to know each other's expectations. And that is the hardest part, because if you have the perfect romance and all of a sudden you say something and that person doesn't react right. I was madly, my very first boyfriend, I was madly in love with him. And I would tell him I loved him all the time. And that was an insecurity issue now looking back. And I asked him one day, I said, does it bother you that I tell you I love you all the time? And he says, yeah, it does. He could have stabbed me right then and there, because our relationship lasted 2 more months after that. Because
Mm,
my expectation of my him feeling the same about me was not there. But I was a
exactly.
teenager. So, I mean, it just, you have to come to a point in a marriage, in any relationship, whether it be friendship, that you know what the friendship is, that there's a equal give and take, and that your expectations are being met and so are theirs. Correct?
And I think the piece to that we have to really understand is that our expectation of others isn't valid until they buy into it. And so you have to have that conversation with them and say, hey, this is what I expect of you in this relationship, in this friendship, in this marriage, in whatever. And if they're like, that's fine with me, then settled. But if they're like, that's not okay with me, this is what I expect in the relationship, or this is how I feel like I'm going to be in this relationship, then you're in what's called negotiation. And once you have buy-in from both sides, then you can move forward. But if you just sit there and expect the other person to love you the same amount that you love them without their buy-in, that's your own expectation of you and the relationship you want to be in. Um, but you have to have that conversation and then come to a middle ground, and maybe you are on the same level and it's great. Those are the times when we don't even realize we had the expectation, when everything's just working as without even thinking. That's
Right.
exactly how it's working. We wake up in the morning and the electricity's on. We don't recognize that we had the expectation that we wake up and the electricity's on. But that is an expectation, because I guarantee you, the moment you wake up and the electricity's off, you're upset
Oh
because you
yeah.
expected the electricity to be on. And so the same thing in relationships. We don't recognize that we had the expectation until it starts to kind of disappear from what we think it should be. But yeah, we have to have those conversations. We have to get buy-in from both sides and just to have an expectation of somebody else doesn't mean it's the case. Doesn't mean it's reality.
Well, and it's always, and when you start feeling that's it's going south, instead of just saying, "Oh well, it'll get better," stop and have open communications. Talk to each other. Don't sit there and just say, "Okay." It's like the couple who decides, "Oh, our marriage is crap," but hey, I know what'll fix it. Let's have a kid.
Right.
And I've seen people do that. And I'm just like, if it wasn't good before, why are you bringing another person into this? Because now you have a total different set of expectations. And as you know, a baby is a lot of work.
Exactly.
So, you know,
And
anyway.
if you didn't like that person, then you're going to end up with a parenting situation that's not agreeable.
Yeah, it's the same thing when I watch people get married because someone's pregnant. It's like, were you in love with them beforehand? And in some cases, yeah, and in some cases, no. And sometimes that works out, but a lot of the times it doesn't. So, but that's once again, it's a choice.
It
It's
is.
an expectation. Just because you get pregnant doesn't mean you have to get married. It's not required. Although
It's a
some
true
people think it
story.
is. I know. So I want to thank you for joining us. You have a website called havingexpectations.com. Is your book available on Amazon?
It is. The link to the book, well, actually, all my books, they're all on that website, havingexpectations.com, and easy enough to find.
What other books do you have?
The one that I'll mention is called Living Unscripted. That was my first book, and that's the one that kind of talks about using improv in your everyday life. And, we live a life of improv. We're making it all up as we go. We don't have a script. Nobody else is following a script. So if you know the rules of improv, you're going to have a much easier life, I think.
Yeah, and that it's one of my acting coaches taught me. When you're acting, live in the moment. It's the same thing with writing, and most people don't get that. But when I'm writing, I'm living in that moment and making it up as I go along. So improv applies there too.
Absolutely.
So I really thank you for your time and joining me, and I hope my audience finds this a fascinating conversation. I think they will. So thank you, Ben,
Yeah.
and
Thanks for having me.
have a good day. Thanks, guys, for tuning in to the Better 2 podcast. Your listenership is greatly appreciated. If you like what you hear, remember to hit subscribe. We also have our videos on YouTube. They're usually posted the same day as the podcast, and you should check it out. If you have a question or you would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. The email is Donna, Dauna, at thebetter2podcast.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and catch you next time.